Good evening, animated GIF fans. It's Roger Quinn here, again for another fun-filled tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to look at how to make an animated GIF like this. Isn't that fabulous? That's created mainly in Adobe Photoshop CC with some help from Illustrator. So I'm just going to show you that workflow as to how you would start in Illustrator, take it to Photoshop and export that as an animated GIF, as if for a web banner or something similar. So let's check it out. All right. Here's a little file, what I prepared earlier. And this is Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator CC. But you can do all this in CS6 as well. Nothing particularly spectacular about this. I have, however, created some layers. And I've done this and I've named them. And the reason why I've done this is because it'll just make it a little bit easier when I get to Photoshop. If I've got some of the elements that I am likely to want to consider animating, if I have them on separate layers, it's just going to make the job a bit easier. Okay, so that's why I've done that. You don't have to do that, but it really will make this process easier because the animated GIF process in Photoshop relies on turning layers on and off. Okay, so let's go and check that out. I won't go into detail about how I've created this in Illustrator because it's not that kind of tutorial. All right, to export this correctly to Photoshop, one should use the export menu. And when you do this, you can choose the Photoshop or PSD file format. I'm just going to rename this so I don't get confused with some of my previous files. I'm going to hit export. And when I do that, here's the important bit. It actually gives us an option to write layers. So this way it'll keep all my Illustrator layers intact so that when they go to Photoshop, they'll still be there. I have a feeling too that I think the default resolution of this is 150 pixels per inch. This is of course for screen playback, so we will make it 72 with color model of RGB. Jolly good, there it goes. And let's go and open that. I'll just close my Illustrator file and let us open what we just made in Photoshop. And there it is, tiny little thing it is. That's because of this rectal display or retinal display or whatever it is that's on this so-called laptop. Thanks very much, Apple. And anyway, fantastic, there it is. And here are our layers displaying in Photoshop. Okay, so it's pretty much the same thing. The only thing that's changed is it will sometimes convert type layers, so I've got typographic objects, into a grouped layer set, which it's done. So I'm just going to go ahead. So instead I will tell it to merge group. Merge group, you idiot, not collapse, merge group. And there it is. And so it's now just a regular pixelated layer. Okie dokie. Now, if you have started up your Photoshop in a default format, you'd probably be working in the Essentials or the Painting or something like that workspace. In order to create our animated GIF, we need to move into the Motion workspace. And the reason for this is because it makes available this little gizmo down in the bottom. It brings up the timeline. And in the timeline now in Photoshop CC, and probably previous versions, you can now work with effectively a time-based media. And the good folks at Adobe have given us two options to do that. We can work with a somewhat familiar video timeline or a frame animation timeline, which is, I guess, frame animation is a bit more like Flash, Well, not really, but a little bit. And the video timeline's perhaps a bit like Premiere, okay, or After Effects or something like that. Anyway, we're going to use frame animation because we're only going to want a limited number of frames for an animated GIF. And that creates what doesn't really look like a button. Thanks very much, Adobe. However, it is a button, and you can click that, and it will introduce your first frame. And there it is. And in theory, you could now export that and you would have a GIF file, but of course it's not animated. So to animate it, what we do is basically think of it like a stop frame animation. You're going to introduce a number of frames and you're going to activate or turn on and off the layers as you want to see them in order to create the animation effect. Now, just before I do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of Photoshopness in order to get a bit more of an effect going on here. So I'm just going to put some layer effects on some of this. First, I'm just going to duplicate my text layer. And then I'm going to go to blending options and I'm going to add an outer glow. And I'll just do this fairly quickly. I'm just going to use some settings that I think will look reasonably suitable. I'm going to up the opacity and I'm going to give it a little bit more spread and size because what I'm trying to do is make it look somewhat like a flashing neon sign or something like that. And there we go. And so if I just turn on and off that layer, you'll start to see how that could feasibly be turned into some form of animation, which is what we will do. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing actually with the star layers, but the effect I want to achieve there is I want to turn the stars on and off gradually, but I'm just going to put one global sort of glow effect on that towards the end. So to do that, I'm going to select all of the star layers, duplicate first, duplicate layers, and then I'm going to create the group. Okay, new group from layers. And there we go. And the reason why I did that is because I want to put a glow effect on all of those layers in one fell swoop. So if I make a group out of it, I can do that just with one setting. So that's why I've selected that new group, and I'm going to add my outer glow. Exactly the same sort of effect that I used previously. So I'll just do that once again fairly quickly. Up the opacity to, I think it was 65, 20 and 10 for the spread and the size. I'm pretty much leaving that on default as you saw, just changing some of the settings. And there we go. And once again, I can now just see the potential effect of that by turning that layer on and off. All right, fantastic. So let's get started with creating the actual animation. And so to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all my star layers to start with. And I'm just going to have the very first frame, and it's just the logo that's going to appear. So that's my first frame. In order to create the second frame, if I hover around down here in the timeline, there is a little button, looks like a page curl, that is going to allow me to duplicate the previous frame because it's currently selected. So I'll do that and it copies it. Okay, this is where the magic begins. Anyway, so in that new layer, I'm going to turn on my first star. There it is. And if I just go back to my timeline and jump between by clicking on those layers, I can see that in layer 1 there's no star, layer 2 a star appears because I've just turned it on. So that's the process for doing this type of animation, frame-based, is this combination of activating layers and adding frames and just keeping an eye on exactly which frame you've got selected when you're turning the different layers on. So I'm just going to jump through that now and create a few more and progressively turn on my stars. And there we go, that's all the stars done. I'm going to do one final layer of that because that's where I want to activate. activate the glow effect. Okay, so to just quickly jump through that, I'm clicking back on frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, 4, 5, 6. And I can also hit the play button at the bottom there, and that will play through the effect for me. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of weird looking little buttons down the bottom there. Some are familiar, forwards and backwards. One that we will find useful if you want to have an endlessly looping animation, a lot of animated GIFs are, you can change that once setting down there to forever. And there it goes. So that's more or less the effect I want. I just want to make one modification of this now. I want to have my logo flashing on and off, at least the neon effect for that. So I'm going to just stop the playback, go back to frame 1. Frame 1, I don't want any glow. Frame 2, I'm going to go up and activate now the duplicated layer, which I've made previously for the type. Okay. Frame 3, it won't have that setting. Frame 4, I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm just alternating this effect, as you can see. Frame 5, not on. Frame 6, I do want it on. So the final effect, if I now hit the playback button, so there's only a 6-frame animation, isn't that spectacular? You could just look at that all day, but let's not. Let's move on. And what we now need to do is work out how to export that so it actually plays as an animated GIF. At the moment, it's still obviously a Photoshop file. Okay. Now, of course, a wise person would be saving one's work as a PSD file. And the reason for that is because it's going to keep all of those settings in case you need to edit that. Very important. So that you can change it or modify it or do whatever it is that you feel like doing to it. However, in order to get it to actually work as a web banner, to work in a browser, we need to export it. And in Photoshop, there are indeed some save as and exports and things like that. The method we need to use to do this, though, is to use the Save for Web option. So it's just in the File menu, Save for Web. And let's go. There it is, and fantastic. You get this interesting looking interface. Now, this section of Photoshop is designed specifically just for sending graphics for use on web pages, hence the convenient term Save for Web. Up in the top right hand corner you will see there is, depending on which version of Photoshop you've got, there's 5 different file types. These are all types of graphics that are suitable for use on the web. It may have defaulted for you to JPEG. If it has, just turn it on to GIF. Okay, it doesn't have animated GIF there. And that's because Photoshop is smart enough to know that you've done a bunch of frames. And if you choose GIF, it will actually send out all the frames for you. Fantastic. Okay, now another relatively important thing to understand about GIFs is, in fact, if we have a look up here in the presets, you see there's a bunch of, many in fact, GIF presets, and they've got different numbers against them. Now, what that's referring to is the color set that the GIF file is going to use. Unlike JPEG files and some others, GIF files can only have up to 256 colors. For some reason, my color table here isn't previewing. Anyway, trust me when I say that this would actually change to show you different colors that are being used in the file. So what you can do is you can actually restrict how many colors it's going to take to display that. Here we go. I was on the wrong setting there. So as I change that down from 128 to 64, that little palette of colors is what the file will be embedding in order to display that. And it's fantastic, and you could reduce that down to really only a very small amount of colors, but of course be mindful that when you do that, that's going to restrict how effective your graphic looks on the web because it's going to really restrict the number of colors it can use. So if you've used some fancy effects like we have to do those glows and things, you might find you do want a few more colors in your palette. Now the trade-off there is if you keep your eye down in the bottom left-hand corner over here, as you drop the number of colors, it's actually showing you the file is becoming smaller and smaller, which is a good thing for web graphics. It means it will download faster. However, you do need to be mindful of the color drop that you may experience. For the purposes of this file, I'm going to choose 64 colors. 64. And it should display that graphic reasonably well without dropping too much quality. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do up here that determines how it's going to deal with mixing up the color table there to render your graphics. I'm not going to go into great detail about that right now. We could perhaps explore that some other time. Anyway, let's just move on and export this. And you can still preview the different frames down there. And we'll hit the go button and hit save and find an appropriate place to send that off. And off it goes. It's possible that on your version of Photoshop it may default in that save window to HTML and images down in this bottom format section. What that means is it's going to create a HTML file and a GIF file. Okay, which is fine, but if you kind of know what you're doing, you probably don't really need it to export the HTML because most browsers will display the animated GIF automatically for you. You can open it straight in there. Okay, so I'm just going to put mine on images only and hit save. And then we might go and jolly well have a look at that. And there it is. And I'm just going to tell that to open in a browser. Safari will do. And there it is. And yeah, it's not too bad. In fact, it's playing reasonably well. However, some people may feel, well, that's really quick. I wish I could slow it down a bit. Well, you can. If you go back to Photoshop, and in the Photoshop version of this file, not the animated GIF version of the file. So don't open the GIF, open the original PSD file where you made the sequence. And down the bottom of each frame you'll see there's a little time indicator. At the moment it says 0 seconds. Alright, so if you click one of those drop downs, now I've selected all those frames. I just shift clicked all of them because I want to make the change right across all of them. And if I go to that little drop down and I'm going to choose 0.2, okay, which means it's going to add a little bit of extra time to how long each frame is playing for. Okay, and you'll see there's some other options there. You can slow it down by the increments that are there, or you can type in your own. Okay, so you can make a really, really slow sequence if you want to, but I'm just going to slow it down just a little bit. Okay, now save that again, and then export it again by saving for web. I'm going to leave all the same settings. And just hit the go button, save it. I'll just replace it. I'm going to write over it. There we go. And have another look at it this time, and it should be playing back just very, very slightly slower. Open with Safari, and there we go. It's got that very slight delay to it, which is spectacular. Anyway, so that is the fun-filled world of creating an animated GIF in Photoshop CC. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, use these powers for good and not for evil. All right, bye now.